I got you wear your hat though.
Okay. Come here.
Ready? Ready? Don't move.
Okay.
Calvin Castine, outstanding in the field. I've never been told I was outstanding in the field before. Have you?
Not recently. No,
Not recently. Okay. Well, in a field on the Douglas Road, 32 Douglas Road, in the town of Saranac. And whose property are we on?
Gary Donovan.
Gary
He's
Donovan.
our first vice president, Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club.
Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club, also known as CVARC, right?
That's right, yeah.
And who am I talking with?
Dan Jerry.
Dan, where are you from?
Plattsburgh. West Shazy, actually.
Well,
Yeah.
there is a difference, you know.
Yeah.
Just like Saranac and Denimore, there is a difference.
About 8 miles, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and we learned a little bit about amateur radio a few years ago when we talked to a guy named Al Haggett. You know Al?
Sure, yep. Don't see too much of him anymore. He's, well, his age, his health has gotten the best of him, and he's sort of retired, but he's on the radio once in a while. Comes around.
Okay, now you're getting prepared here. You're not out in this field just for the heck of it. What's coming up?
Every year, the amateur radio community in the United States holds what they call a field day. And the object of the thing is to erect antennas and radios and equipment and get together and get organized and communicate during a 24-hour period with as many other hams in the United States as we can. It's sort of a simulation of an emergency operation where we might have to go to some location, set up antennas, equipment, and
never know when an ice storm hits or whatever.
No, that's absolutely correct. Yep. Like we were quite involved during the ice storm. The National Guard came up and found out their radio equipment wasn't compatible with anything up here, so they actually commandeered some of our equipment, and we programmed their equipment so that they could make use of ours. And yeah.
In fact, doesn't the Amateur Radio Club have a room right at the Emergency Services in Clinton County?
Yes, we do. Yep.
So you are considered to be part of our emergency broadcast system, I would say.
One aspect of amateur radio. Amateur radio was created by the Congress of the United States. Several purposes. One, to provide a pool of trained operators in times of emergencies, to advance the knowledge and practice of radio, which is broadened to communications these days, and international goodwill. We some of us get to talk to people around the world.
Okay.
So RACES, Radio Amateur Emergency Civil Services, was created also by the federal government as a subgroup of amateur radio to serve the government in times of emergencies. And during the ice storm, we were very involved in doing that.
Okay, now you do communicate. I guess part of the fun of being in ham radio is communicating with people, and it's usually potluck in many cases, isn't it?
Well, we have different frequencies that we operate on. Locally, we all operate on VHF, very high frequency. We use little 2-meter handheld radios or 2-meter radios in our vehicles, and we communicate through a repeater. We have one on Whiteface, one on top of Rand Hill, one on top of Lion Mountain.
Who paid for those?
We do. We
members of the club.
We not only dig in our own pockets to buy our own equipment. We also buy equipment for our community use, and that's VHF. HF, high frequency, is typically a larger radio. In fact, the antenna that you can see behind us here is HF antenna.
Okay, we can't see it on camera, but it looks like an antenna you might have in for your TV set.
It's something like that, only quite a bit larger.
Yeah.
And we're able to communicate with that kind of antenna and accompanying radio equipment, HF radio equipment, literally around the world, or in this particular case, field day with other hams across the United States.
Okay, so, but a lot of times when I talked with Al is you send a a message out there, and you're never quite sure who's going to get it.
Yeah, well, in HF, that's
Yeah.
particularly true. HF, it depends on a lot of variables, especially sunspots. When there are eruptions on the surface of the sun, the greater the number of eruptions, curiously enough, the greater the communications capability here on Earth with HF radio. At nighttime, communications tends to be better during the day, and just quite a number of variables determine how far and how well our signals get out. And
It's amazing sometimes what can skip from one spot to another.
Yeah.
I just had a little monitor we used to monitor our kids' room when kids were young.
Yep.
And one morning I'm awakened and I'm hearing this. I wasn't quite sure if it was German or Russian news report, because they were talking about the Russian leaders,
Yeah.
and it was coming in over my little monitor in my bedroom.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah. Propagation. It's called propagation. It's the science, the theory and science of how radio waves can travel. Typically in HF radio, which we're going to be using here, our radio waves will bounce off the ionosphere and back down to Earth. And
Like a pool shot.
kind of like that, yeah. And we really, as you said, never really know who's gonna be on the other end of the signal and be able to. And of course, transmitting and having them here is only half of it. They have to be able to transmit back to us,
right.
so that we know somebody's hearing us.
That's right. It's like they might be able to hear you, but you got to be able to hear them.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's like the tree falling in the woods.
Yep.
If nobody hears it.
We call that a contact, and the
I would call that a contact too. That's
brief exchange of information between us is called a QSO.
now you end up with people that don't speak the same language though. What happens then?
Typically, English is universal in the amateur radio.
Really?
In this country, we tend not to spend a lot of time learning foreign languages, whereas
I
in
know
Europe,
that.
it's not unusual for people to know 2 or 3 languages. So
Right, and English being one of them.
English being one of them.
Okay, how far away are you if you personally talk to someone?
Australia,
That's the other side of the world. You can't get any further than that, because no matter which way you go, it's
it's quite
there.
a ways. Yeah, it's quite a ways away. Yeah.
Yeah. So they spoke English, I bet.
Yeah, they did. They did. It was kind of peculiar accent. I thought it was different from Weshazy or Pearl, but
Well,
nonetheless,
maybe more like Altona.
perhaps.
Now, how do you know that the person answering you is legitimate? That is not some guy in Minnesota who's making believe he's sitting there in Australia.
Well, obviously there's no absolute way, but we can look his call sign up. We all have call signs assigned by, in this case, the U.S. government, the Federal Communications Commission. And other countries have something similar, and their call signs are assigned to them. Each call sign has a prefix letter and numbers, and we can look up the call signs in a directory to see what country they're from. So if they say they're from Czechoslovakia, for example, and we look up and see that they're using a Mexican call sign, we might ask him, are you visiting from Mexico?
Right.
Excuse me, but even if they are visiting from Mexico, there's a protocol they're supposed to use at the end of their call sign, / something or other, to signify they're actually from Mexico operating in Yugoslavia.
So you can take your ham radio on the roads, sort of. Then,
Oh,
can't
sure. Yeah. Not everybody does, because the HF radio, I should say, requires a considerably larger antenna.
you? Yeah.
And most guys prefer not to equip their vehicles with large antennas.
Yeah, that's.
But almost all
practical.
of us use 2-meter UHF rigs and communicate through repeaters.
Now, how many guys and gals? You must have some women too. How many people in your club?
We had a couple lady members. Actually, more than that. Probably more like 10. A lot of them are wives who got their call signs so they can communicate with their husbands on occasion, but typically don't attend meetings. I think we have about 20 people who regularly participate, about 60 members of the club, and a handful of lifetime members who've really done a lot for the club, and we're voted as lifetime members.
So they get free dues.
Yep, yep, that's right.
Okay. And how wide an area is the Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club? How wide an area would your membership entail?
We have people from Montreal, a couple of guys from Montreal who are members of our club. Lake Placid, Saranac Lake, Keysville, Malone. Actually, there are quite a number of other clubs.
That's what I was wondering. Is there any locally besides yourselves, or just
not in Plattsburgh, not in Clinton County, but there's one in there's one in Saranac Lake, for example. Quite a number in Vermont, Montreal.
Yeah. So you must communicate within your little network of groups.
Yeah, we typically exchange newsletters as a compliment and cooperate on occasion in different projects.
Now, outside of being regulated and the fact that you need a license and so on from the government, is there any other entity that overlooks the club? I mean, your club operates as its own. As long as you don't break any laws, you're okay. There's no.
We're for the most part self-regulating. I mean, if we hear someone locally using a radio and the call sign sounds fishy, we look it up and find out it's not a legitimate call sign. We work together to determine who this person is and get them to stop transmitting on our frequencies. As far as organizations are concerned, there's one organization called the American Radio Relay League in Newington, Connecticut, that kind of acts like our spokesman, our union, if you will. The dues that we pay to ARRL help to afford ARRL to have lobbyists in Washington who fight for our frequency space. And
now, does the Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club have its own frequencies, or you just use the frequencies that are available?
By virtue of the repeaters, we do. A repeater is a special kind of radio that listens on one frequency and transmits on another, so that and our radios also have to have the ability to do that. So when we push our transmit button, it actually changes to a different frequency and transmits. The repeater listens on that frequency and repeats what it hears on a different frequency. So when we release our button, or somebody else who has not held down the button can hear on the same frequency that the repeater is transmitting on. That makes sense?
Yeah. So you don't own those, though. I mean, another club.
We cooperate between clubs.
Yeah.
There's occasionally a club in Montreal, for example, is not aware of our repeater and the fact that we use that frequency, and they'll set up a new repeater and they'll start. And we'll contact them and say, hey, we have a little conflict here, and they'll move. We have a great deal of frequency space.
Yeah.
We have a lot of latitude. Yeah.
Now, I would say you're probably lower frequency than like the regular radio, AM radio, FM radio.
No, much higher.
Much higher frequency.
Yeah.
So now, but VHF is. Starts at channel 2, which is supposed to be channel 1, so you're below that as far as...
I tell you the truth, I don't know what TV frequencies are. I
don't know how high they are or whatever, but
our 2-meter radio is in the 144 megahertz million cycle range. We also use UHF, which is ultra high frequency, typically in the 440 megahertz or a million cycles per second range.
So the UHF would be above what the UHF channels would be using, the TV channels.
Again, I don't know what I've never had
never
had a need to know what those are.
As long as you know what
we also do amateur television, by the way.
You do?
Yeah.
So do I.
Do you really?
Well, no.
Oh, you mean this guy? Okay. Well, this isn't really amateur, is it?
Well, I'm supposed to be paid, but people forget about that. Except Bob Dwyer. Bob Dwyer remembered. Thank you.
Your name?
Calvin Castine.
You're Calvin Castine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You got me confused.
Yeah, Bob Dwyer was calling. Yeah, he's the guy climbing up the bus there a minute ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how about if I want to become a ham radio operator and I don't want to join your club?
You don't have to.
I don't have to join your club?
No.
No.
No. Curiously enough, I went to the FCC website and discovered they have a database, and you can look up ham call signs. And you can also put in zip codes, and you can find out all of the call signs registered in your zip code. Incidentally, an amateur radio license is good for 10 years. It was erroneously published in the Press Republican as 1 year. It's not. It's 10 years. A little manipulation, I was able to determine that there are close to 500 licensed hams on the New York State side of the lake within 50 miles of Plattsburgh. 500.
And they're not in your club, you better get a hold of them.
Well,
do they have a list of the names?
A lot of guys get a license. It was something they've always wanted to do, and they work towards it, and they get it, and they get some equipment, and they play around with it for a little while, and move on to something else, I guess. I think it's kind of a shame that we can't get them to,
Are their names available, though? You can get their names?
Yeah.
So you could contact them then.
Well, 500 people, that's a lot of postage. We sent out...
If you guys can afford to build a tower, you can afford to send out a little postage.
Well, you order your priorities and you live accordingly, right?
Okay.
We sent out a couple of hundred invitations a couple of years ago just to see what happened. And
not much.
Not very much, no. We had about 10 people respond, and oh well.
Yeah, well, they want to do it, but they just don't want to be part of a club.
A lot of different things that a person can get involved with these days. It's awesome. Hang gliding and experimental aircraft and things that just didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's all something that can take up your time if you find your interest.
Yeah.
So, is this your annual get-together, or do you have more days where you all meet face to face?
We have a monthly meeting. We meet.
You don't do it over the radio?
We actually twice a day we meet on the radio,
oh, really?
or many of us do, not all of us. We have what's called the weather net, and we meet on our whiteface repeater frequency, and in turn we transmit what the weather is where we are, and the weather station in Burlington pays particular attention because they have provided us training to accurately report weather conditions. So we do that twice a day.
Give me a report right here.
Well, it's not overcast.
Not overcast.
Clear. Say the temperature is probably close to 80. And the wind, judging by the trees, I would guess 8 to 10 miles an hour. We have no rain gauge. I don't know what the barometric pressure is because we don't have a gauge for that right now either. But
okay, see, that's you could do that too if you were trained. You could assess the weather just like that.
That's right. Yeah. Suppose you wanted to be a ham. Well,
I am a ham, but I have no radio though.
Ham radio operator is what I meant. About a year ago, the club decided to invest in some manuals that we bought from ARRL, American Radio Relay League.
You got an interesting. Okay, there's an interesting fly in your face. Go ahead.
They're about $20, and they tell you virtually everything you need to know to pass the entry-level exam, which would provide you with a license and enable you to talk on our repeaters with a handheld or a 2-meter radio. And in addition to that, if you were interested, with this same license, you could do amateur television, you could do moon bounce. But the only thing you can't do with an entry-level license is HF, which, talk to people in Australia, for example. You cannot do that with an entry-level license.
Oh, really?
No.
And why not?
Well, I guess perhaps in an HF radio, you're authorized to have over 1,000 watts of power. Now put that into perspective. Wiry radio station used to have 500 watts.
Right.
500, okay? And we were authorized double that.
Mm-hmm.
We are authorized to have a tower, what the heck is it, 200 feet high? We're authorized some significant power and facilities. And as a result of that, the transmissions that we could make from these facilities, if not done properly, could mess up communications literally around the world.
Right.
So, it requires a higher class of license so that we prove that we really know what we're doing before we get involved with this higher powered equipment.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, and you knew the answer.
Yeah, I did.
Now, amateur television. Now, what?
I haven't played with that.
Yeah, you can just send out a signal, and
yeah,
it's kind of like these low-power TV stations, I would imagine. Like
but that's what it is.
Channel 27 and Channel 39.
I don't know much about them, but I would guess it's very similar. An amateur radio operator can buy equipment for under $1,000 and make arrangements with some. Of course, you have to have somebody listening. I mean, transmitting on a frequency doesn't mean much if you don't have somebody to listen.
Is anybody out there right now watching this?
There are several people over in the Burlington area, Burlington, Vermont, who regularly communicate with the amateur television, and nobody around here that I know of. But
how far would their signal go?
well, probably 50 miles, which isn't bad at all.
And you got to have, of course, depending on the mountains. I know people in Lion Mountain, and maybe some people here in Dannemora, can't get Channel 5, can't get Channel 3 because of the way the mountains are and so on.
That's absolutely right.
Got mountains to contend with, but assuming a site to site.
The higher the frequency, the greater the need for height, so that you escape the problem of something being in the way.
Right.
Yep.
And on the receiving end, what must have to have a special receiver so they can run that through their television. To tune it in.
Again, typically for about $1,000, a ham radio operator can invest in equipment that both sends and receives, and obviously both the sender and the receiver have to be on the same frequency.
Right. Right. But so it might be an investment on the receiving part. So you can't just go out there and start your own TV station because people won't be paying $1,000 just to watch you.
Nope. Nope.
All right.
It's a hobby.
Yeah. Right.
In fact, one of the limitations, perhaps the only limitation we have, is that we cannot be involved in any activity that generates money for ourselves. Next month we'll be going up to Lake Placid. 20 of us signed up so far. We're hoping to get close to 100 hams to work with the Ironman organization. Actually, the various ambulances who will provide services for Ironman and will provide emergency communications for them. And it's always fun. We get to be not only a spectator, firsthand, right up close to the line, riding in the ambulance, for crying out loud.
As a spectator, not as a...
as a spectator, but not only as a spectator, but also as a participant in the respect that we'll be providing a valuable service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ambulances come from quite a wide range from Lake Placid, and they don't all transmit on the same frequency. So we solved that problem.
Oh. So you guys have your own frequency, so they can use yours.
We'll use a repeater on Whiteface and on the Saranac Lake, and
Yeah, and you did point out an important thing. I think it's amateur radio, so you can't get into this with the idea of making a dollar. It's amateur radio. It's for fun.
We're prohibited from making any money at all.
Yeah. So you can't go out there and sell an ad and say, I'm going to play some music and sell an ad.
No, we can't. We can't do that. In fact, one-way transmissions are also prohibited. It's called broadcasting. We're really not allowed to do that either.
Okay. So
we have to do point-to-point communications.
Okay. Well, if somebody's interested in joining your club, is there an address they can contact?
Well, the web address, cvarc.us. Or they can contact me, Dan Jerry, 563-4986. Or they can stop by second Wednesday of every month, the May Courier Center on
Tom
Miller Road, 7 o'clock. We have a monthly meeting. Everybody's welcome. Anybody who's interested in radio communications don't need to be licensed. You're welcome on board.
Okay. And you guys will be here this weekend of June 25th and
6th.
In 26, you'll be here all weekend?
Saturday and Sunday. Well, the event actually starts at 12 noon and runs all night long, 24 hours until 12 noon the following day.
So you're working shifts or what?
Well, I think probably most of us will just stay up all 24 hours.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Some people go home
so
and come
much
back
fun.
later.
Yeah.
It really is interesting. It's a challenge. Last year we had a fellow that brought up a refurbished World War II spotlight, one of those big, huge 8-foot diameter things, and I can't tell you how far, maybe a mile or two into the air, and people came from everywhere to find out what the heck is that light.
Yeah, we used to see those growing up. You see those all the time, the airports and so on.
Movie theaters when a new show would open.
The theaters had them. But so I don't know if we did it the first time. We stopped briefly because we had to get some information here. But did we mention who owns the field here? I don't know if we mentioned. If we didn't, we were going to say it. If we did, we'll say it again.
Gary Donovan.
Donovan.
It's used to be a rifle range that he set up, personal rifle range, and he and his friends had come here, and they've lost interest in that. So once a year we've been coming up here in the last few years. It's a real nice place. We do a little cookout and
what does he do with it the rest of the time? I mean, has he got it mowed?
mows along.
Well, that's good too. Keeps the lawnmower dealers in business. Well, I want to thank Tim Lincourt for giving me a call to invite me down here. He's sitting down. He's good at relaxing. That's his specialty.
Tim's hips are hurting him today, so he's taking it easy.
He's got a lot of aches and pains that he's earned over the years. Self-inflicted, most of them.
Yeah, but how was the antenna? Antenna was okay, right?
The antenna's fine. He fell off the roof, but the antenna is fine. You got some line here that's just to
we've set up an antenna on the hill, you can see, and we need to get this feed line, it's called, coaxial cable from our communications bus to that antenna, so didn't want people running over the wire or running into it, so we propped it up.
One final thing. When we did our show with Al Haggett, it seemed like computers were becoming part of what was happening with amateur radio. And some people were, rather than by voice, were just contacting each other by the computer.
There's become a national phenomenon. Condominium owners associations are opposed to having amateur radio antennas on their roof, even though it might save their lives in a hurricane in Florida, for example. So there's a lot of resistance now to community zoning for putting up an antenna. Like I told you, a 200-foot antenna we're authorized to have. So a lot of hams have gotten on the internet, and there's there are actually a variety of methods, but if you're a licensed ham operator, you can join a certain organization and you can talk to other people via the computer literally around the world. We still have something in common. We have an interest in radio, and we have an interest in communicating.
Right.
We can do things on the radio that we're not authorized to do via radio too. For example, one of these organizations, I was tuning channels, so to speak, digitally, and came across somebody playing guitar, which is verboten on amateur radio. And I listened, and it sounded like Greek guitar, which I'd never heard before. So I listened, and when the guy stopped playing, he spoke, and it sounded like Greek to me. I mean, and then another fella came on, and he played guitar for a while, again with a sort of a Greek motif, and he spoke Greek, and then I broke in and requested permission to join their communication, and asked if they were Greek, and he said yes, they were. Turned out one fellow was from Montreal, and the other one was in New Zealand, and they would get together from time to time and play guitar for each other, and it was kind of curious.
Illegal, but
no, this is via computer, via the internet,
computer.
So not illegal.
Just not using the airwaves.
Not quite the same, right?
Now I've got to ask, people would be sitting there saying, he said he never heard Greek guitar before, but he said it sounded like Greek guitar.
Well, no.
Explain that one.
It sounded like Greek music.
Okay. Greek music on a guitar.
What do they play? Mandolin, perhaps?
I don't know what the...
But I knew it was a guitar because I've been fond of the guitar and carting one around my entire life anyway. So I knew it was a guitar and it sounded like Greek music. So
Okay, you got to explain
that's
it.
what I mean. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Dan, that we should know before I head back to lower ground?
My, sure is a nice day.
It's a beautiful day, and we had a weather report, a trained weatherman here telling us what the weather was.
Not quite. Don't call me Tom Nestor. I'm not as good as he is.
Well, he's good at telling us what happened.
We don't have storm trackers.
What's going to
available
happen?
to us.
What's going to happen? None of them are that good at telling us what's going to happen.
Pretty good though.
That 5 day isn't.
Doesn't impress you very much.
No. It keeps changing. It gets to 4 days, it's different. It gets to 3 days, it's different. Well, it gives us something to talk about in between.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So, what do you do?
This is it.
What do you do?
This is it. Hometown Cable. You've
just-
never heard of Hometown Cable?
No.
Oh, well, you got to get out of.
What channel?
Well, do you get
Oh,
cable?
it's cable. No, I don't.
Oh, wow. See,
That's probably why I never
you're
heard
sitting
of
there on your ham radio, not.
No, I live. Do you know where the Beartown ski area is?
Yeah.
I live about a mile past that. I can't get DSL for my computer. I can't get. We don't have cable, so I have a two-way satellite internet access for internet, and I have a one-way satellite for TV. Can't get channel 57 either.
So you know what it's like to be blocked out.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. All right. Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club. If you'd like more information, they're www.cvarc.us.
Yep.
Aren't you amazed how I remember that? You'd think I was reading it off the side of the bus, but that's not the case. I remembered that. And your phone number, I don't remember that. I know it's 4980 something.
563-4986.
Because when you said it, I said my age 49 and your age 86. I remember those numbers.
I'm not quite that old.
Oh, Tim's age 86, my age 49.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
All right.